Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers podcast. This is, of course, the podcast where we sample everything that television and film has to offer and then let you know what's good, what's bad, and what you should also put in your mouth. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me this week to talk through all of this stuff we've got going on, it's Grace. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. There's a lot out there for people to watch. I'm excited to try to narrow it down for folks. Try to give some recommendations and some. You don't have to watch this. In fact, maybe definitely don't watch this.
Yes, of course. Sometimes we talk about some of the news in this world. Sometimes we just are talking about shows, movies. I think this is going to be a show movie, a focused episode. Lots of stuff over on the television. There's some movies coming out. And of course, it's October. It's October time. And we discussed this before. I think we're going to get into a little bit of a horror movie journey over the course of October as we quest to determine what are the best horror films of 2024?
Yes, I've watched some good horror movie. I watched the movie that was horrific. It was not a horror movie, but it was scary. But I watched some good stuff already, and there's some stuff coming out that I am excited to watch. So yeah, we'll get into it, Taran.
Yes, I think a big topic, in the for the horror enjoyers, horror lovers, like myself. Although I don't always have the time, especially in the summer, to watch a bunch of horror movies. But this has been a good year for horror. Off the back of good year for horror, off the back of good year for horror. It's been a good time for horror. I think in part because and I think this probably started roughly paranormal activity time, that Blumhouse kind of picked up on this strategy of like low budget, high performance horror movie. Horror movies are just really good like business practice for theaters because people love going to theaters to watch horror movies, which I don't know that you would have anticipated 15 years ago, but here we are. Horror movie genre is thriving, and with a genre that's thriving, we're getting all kinds of different stuff as well. We're getting really good classic horror. We're getting even like exorcism horror, which is not even my thing most of the time. It's finding some really cool stuff like that one with the hand. I don't remember the name of it. It's like one of those generic names.
Talk to me.
Talk to me.
Yeah.
Wow, it was a really fun. I was like, oh, okay. Listen, you got me. To more experimental stuff, artsy stuff is kind of the new thing. A24 loves diving into those. So lots to explore, especially this year in the world of horror, Grace.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a theory here about this. I think you've touched on a lot of the points that I think are interesting. I'm only going to tell people my theory if they subscribe to the podcast. So we know Scripted TV. You can search it in your podcaster app of choice. Subscribe.
Yeah, do it now. If you don't do it,
I'm not going to.
What Grace says is going to be a lie. It's going to be
scary.
different than if you had done it. It's listen. We're not responsible for what happens to you if you end up in a horror movie. That's not our fault.
This is the podcast version of like 90s chainmail, Taran. That if they don't subscribe and then tell 5 friends about the podcast, they'll be haunted. They're end up in a
Surely that's been made into a horror movie.
It should. I don't know.
It's kind of like The Ring.
There's probably a movie on Shudder or something that was that. Okay, here's my theory. Now that everybody has subscribed, thank you so much. My theory is that I think you're right. There's a cost model associated to it that makes a ton of sense. Doesn't cost a ton of money to make a horror movie, and you can get a huge return if you have a successful horror movie. And I think you're right. It is a reason to go to the movie theaters. I think those are fewer and far between. I think you see that like kids movies, obviously like franchise IP has been like, at times very successful. Thinking about like Mario and obviously Avengers and all of that stuff. Horror movie is a place where it makes sense to go watch in a theater. It's very fun. Actually, a movie that I watched recently, I actually really regret not fitting it into my TIFF schedule, because as I was watching the movie, I was like, this is pretty fun in the theater. This would have been so much more fun with a full packed theater. That's The Substance, the movie I'm talking about. And then the other thing is I think that it has delivered on, there's this like way in which it's really rife for metaphor. It's really rife for
Mhm.
social commentary that when it hits really well. I think like for me, I don't know if it's actually the thing that like set this trend off, but it's probably Get Out. That Get Out becomes this success that it's not just a horror movie, it is a topical like reflection of society that feels like art and not just watching gross things. And I'm a fan of both of those things. I'm sometimes okay with watching a gross horror movie just because I saw gross and awful things on the theater screen. So yeah, I think that the combination of those two things, and yeah, mostly the cost model, but that it also then got this appreciation as like for it for what it's saying as well, has led to a really fun horror movie slate over the last few years. I do feel like last year was maybe a little weaker, but I think we're kind of back, and probably that has something to do with like the strike. Like a lot of horror movies end up being
Mm.
independently produced, so they probably didn't have to be. They weren't strict struck. Is that the right word? They didn't have to stop production. Um, and when they came back, they're cheap enough to produce it. You can just sort of like they're here by the time we're a year out of the strike. So yeah, I'm excited to chat about horror with you today, Taran.
Yes, of course. We're not going to be strictly horror this month. We will still touch on
Of
lots of things,
course.
including in this very episode. But it was always something that I enjoy doing, especially when I have the time for it. Which is just watch as much horror as I can in the month of October, even if you're not like a super big horror person. It's a fun little experiment to do to get yourself kind of like in the mood in the spooky season and try out some movies that you might not otherwise have seen. And so there's plenty to check out. We're gonna run through like a brief list of some of the top horror across the year so far. I haven't had the chance to see most of them yet, so this will be quite the exploratory month for me. But there's lots that I'm looking forward to, like The Substance. I saw the TV Glow was a big one.
Yeah.
The Late Night with the Devil is one I almost managed to see but did not get to, and plenty more. So let's talk about some of the things we're looking forward to, and let's also talk about the structure of how we want to do this, because what we want at the end of the month is at least a top five, I would say, of like top five horror movies from this year that you should check out, and maybe one top like recommendation for non-horror fans as well, like
Oh,
what is the horror movie you should watch if you are not a horror person from this
I
year.
lo- I like this. So I think that what our list, and I think that we'll pass around some ballots to some friends who we know have watched some horror movies as well. But I think our time window should be November 1st, 2023 to basically October 31st. And I know that like that's a little because like if something comes out, but if you are a good horror movie, you're not coming out on October 30th. I don't think you should be out before that to then, because like
So
once November 1st
you're
hits,
saying we should dip into some late 2023s,
I think so.
because
I think this
that
is,
might be controversial.
do you think so? If you're a
I
good
think so.
horror movie though, you should have come out.
Because then you're not just looking at the year next to the movie, you're looking at the release date, and that's a little tougher to do.
It is tougher, but we're smart people. We can do it, right? Was there that many good horror movies that came out November 1st to December 31st that people are going to be
I don't
like,
know.
no, no, I don't know either, really. So I'm just guessing. Because the other thing is, if we do this every year, we're basically going to be omitting movies from the end of the
That's
year.
true.
So this is
That's
the only way to
true.
actually get movies from, like, if we do this in a year from now, we'll have not have movies that will have come out in November or December that qualify. And I just, again, I don't think that there's going to be a ton of, I think if your horror movie comes out, it's like, I don't know what happened, but you messed up. You should have held that for another full year.
I feel like that actually happens a decent amount, that horror movies come out, and like I remember like last year, what was the Eli Roth Thanksgiving
Okay,
Thanksgiving?
well, that is true. So should that not, like, where are we going to put that? Are we going to do that? I mean, is that this
That's
year? That's
always my
next year.
problem with end of the year lists, is that it's hard to land them right at the end of the year.
Especially with, like, I really love Oscar bait movies, and a lot of times they're like dropping those on like December 25th. They're like, or like December
Listen,
20th. It's tough.
we first of all, we need to come up with a catchy name for Horror October that somebody hasn't come up with already, because I'm sure it's been created already a billion times. Second, we're more important than the Oscars, and also, calendars. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna say, yeah, end of October is the deadline. Next year when we do this, we'll count November forward. So
I think that
any
makes the most sense. Yeah.
yes, we can certainly talk about ones we're looking forward to for next year, and we're also not going to not talk about horror movies throughout the year either. Of course,
Sure.
like Alien Romulus, I would consider has enough horror in it to be classified as a horror movie, and so we've talked plenty about that, and maybe a
I,
contender. I don't know.
I think what I would like to do here is basically, I think that between us, chat about like things that we think have the potential to end up making the list, to make sure that we're putting them on the radars for each other to watch, and also our lovely audience who are listening. And I think a good
Yes,
place to start is probably The Substance. You have not checked this out yet, right? I presume. And
I've
I
not.
I think you need to. I think it's very fun to watch in the theaters. That's my other recommendation. My caveat is it's pretty extreme body horror, so it's more
That's
gross
weird to
than
watch in a theater.
it's more gross than scary, I would say, is
Can
what
I
I
just
would
say
say.
I watched the I always get it confused. The Handmaiden, Park Chan Wook's.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I watched that in a theater, and boy, it's not body horror, but it's certainly body something. And
Yeah.
that was a lot to watch in a theater. Let me tell you.
Yeah, when we do the wrap up, and if The Substance does happen to make our list, I would love to say what the person next to me, like in front of me, basically said when the movie was over. But I don't want to give it away right now. But yeah, those experiences where you're like, and I have trouble with this when I love a really weird thing, being like recommending it and then thinking about that person in the scene that's like super weird. The best example, not that it's a super weird show, but there's a particular scene in season 1 of White Lotus which involves two gay characters doing a thing to each other, that I was like, I told my mom, I was like, you should watch The White Lotus, and then was like, oh wait, hold on. There's a moment where then I'm worried my mom's be like, why did Grace recommend me? Like in that moment, have a Pavlovian response to me recommending the thing. So sometimes horror gets there. We're like, yeah, I'm hoping you all go to The Substance and are like, oh my God. And you're gonna be thinking about me while you're watching it. So but I think The Substance is worth putting on people's radar as a thing you should try to check out. It's very good. I think it's probably a little long, so just be prepared. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. But Demi Moore is fantastic in it and is just giving the performance of a lifetime. And Margaret Qualley, who I'm a big fan of, is also in this movie and is very fun in it as well. So, The Substance, movie about
Mhm.
aging, bodies. Yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah. Um, there's actually one I watched. Alien, obviously,
Uh huh.
fantastic. I did manage to catch Oddity. I
Oh,
don't
I
know if you
loved
saw it.
Oddity.
Yeah, Oddity was a very fun one. It was not what I expected it to be. Um, and it honestly, I wouldn't even say is like super scary. But I had a good time with it. So I don't know if it would make a list, but I thought it was pretty fun. One to
I
maybe look into.
yeah, I liked Oddity a lot. It was not on my radar. I believe my friend Ariel from Post Show Recaps days recommended Oddity to me. I believe I did a I think I did Oddity, and I did another. I did like the most non-Oddity movie as a back-to-back feature one night. Actually, do you know what's a movie that immediately is going to affect, which is Nosferatu is coming out this year. So, and that's going to
Right.
be, I believe that's a Christmas release. So it's
That's
exactly
what
the
I'm
type of
saying.
movie that's going to mess with it. But I think we're not going to get to it this year, so we have to have the window be November
And when
to
does
October.
Terrifier 3 come out?
Terrifier 3, if they're not bringing that out, this, I know it got played at Fanatic Fest recently, so it should be October 11th. So we don't have
11.
many.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have about 10 days to get ready for. I mean, I haven't really done the Terrifier movies. I have to be honest.
Maybe we can look into that.
Okay,
Then obviously Abigail I did manage to catch. But there's some more like Cuckoo,
loved Cuckoo. Yeah,
Maxine, um,
yeah,
The First Omen I've heard about, Immaculate.
Immaculate.
So
Yeah, There
Lots of movies here.
what else do I have on my list? Trap, I think, would count, probably more thrillery than horror, I think, but if I think we'd probably put it in there. I believe I know that not everybody loved this, but there was it's the Sydney Sweeney movie, which Immaculate I thought
Mhm.
was fun. I think people should check that out. If you haven't watched Stranger Darling, I think it's still playing. This is the
Oh,
movie that I
yes.
told everyone, do not watch, do not read anything about this movie.
Mhm.
Just go watch it. I think that's incredibly important to have the best effect of that movie. Um, Long
Long
Legs
Legs?
is this
Yeah.
year. Um, Heretic is coming out later
Mm.
this. Actually, it's coming out. Oh, it's coming out in November. See, wow,
Ooh.
you were right. This is supposed to be very good. I got great reviews coming out of. I think it definitely played TIFF, and I'm just trying to see. Yeah, it hasn't played anywhere else. Hugh Grant is been pretty well received in this. People are liking him. It also has Sophie Thatcher, who people will know from Yellow Jackets, and the Book of Boba Fett. It's supposed to be pretty fun. So everybody that,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, what we can do too is like when these movies come out, we can also be like, this is how
sure,
they would have placed.
yes, 100%, 100%.
Perhaps, like it's not like we're not going to be talking about those movies when they come out. But
I'm
yeah,
just
that's any other final ones to throw in there?
well,
And we will also be taking recommendations from the audience.
of course. I would say that Beetlejuice is an interesting movie in terms of like how it could potentially map onto a top five. I liked it more. Speak No Evil came out as
Ooh,
well. This is
yes.
the James McAvoy sort of
Yep.
centered film. It's a remake of a
Yep.
Swedish or Danish film. I'll just have to double check my thing on that. That's one I would recommend. I mentioned I saw the TV Glow as well, and
Mhm.
then In a Violent Nature that came out in May
Mm.
as well, and I thought that was particularly at least interesting. It's trying something different. So those would be the things that I would like. I'm not spoiling my list here, but those are the things I would like tell people to watch before we come back, probably closer to Halloween, to
Mhm.
reveal our list. Yeah,
Yeah, so we will take plenty of recommendations and thoughts from the audience. Maybe we'll even throw a poll out there or two by the end of the month. I think we're also going to be looking to get some input from other RHAP We Know Scripted TV people or
that's right.
adjacent people that we know are horror aficionados. So we'll get a little bit of a wider spread here. And then, yeah, we'll have some good horror thoughts for you by the end of the month.
The First Omen was good as I liked it as well. The First Omen, which is in the
Yes.
Omen world as well. So there's a lot of horror to talk through
A lot of
when we
horror to talk
return.
through.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on from horror, then I know that one of the shows we cover here over at We Know Scripted TV is Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power, which we have been discussing the finale coming up next week, I believe,
Yeah.
of season 2. And I think the data just dropped for the first drop of episodes, which was a 3-episode drop, and the news was good.
Good news. Although I'm going to put a giant asterisk next to it,
Mm.
Taran, which the Nielsen ratings for the week, I believe it's first week of September release, which is the week that the Lord of the Rings released. Great news. Rings of Power is the most watched original show of that week. Caveat, they released 3-hour-long plus episodes that week, and the way that the ratings were calculated is by minutes watched. So, you
This
know,
is how Big Brother beat Stranger Things season 4.
right, right.
Minutes watched.
Just minutes watched. Yeah.
Live
Uh
feeds.
oh, they're including the live feeds? That's amazing. Oh, that's an incredible cheat code that they have access to, eh? Yeah. Number 1 is Prison Break, number 1 most watched thing of that week. So continuing to get that sweet Netflix bump. But I take this as like good news with an asterisk for Lord of the Rings: Rings of Power. There's a lot of talk about season 1, people falling off of the show, not watching, not continuing to watch. If you're watching season 2 of a show, I presume you've likely watched all of season 1, maybe not closely, but at least you probably watched it. That's my presumption. And so I think good news that people seemed to be interested in returning to Middle Earth. on
One
Amazon
thing I saw
Prime.
as well about Rings of Power was that they were saying a lot of the audience international.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, which I found very interesting
Hmm.
about that show in particular, because that kind of tracks. Like, for it to have such great ratings, I feel like people don't really talk about it all that much that I see. Like, I mean, that happens all the time, certainly.
Mhm.
But you'd think that Rings of Power is the kind of show that would be very present online if it were as popular as the numbers indicate. Which is not to say that an international audience is not on the internet, but perhaps non-English language speaking
Right.
international audiences that you're not going to see the presence of on the internet as much because you're not reading in a different language, could be significantly contributing to the success of the show for sure.
This isn't just like the Middle Earth viewing numbers. That's the international numbers. People in middle, like the
You know what?
hobbits
You got
sitting
me.
in the. Um, that
Listen, the
yeah,
orc community
yeah,
is
they're big.
huge on this show.
And it's great. They watch it and they also complain about their representation on the show. So they get
Yeah,
that they
I
got
mean,
the
they're like, listen,
outrage
it's
bait.
it's a
Mhm.
big step forward. We're not complaining, but like, listen, it could be a lot better.
um that's funny. The other thing about Amazon Prime is it's really hard to tell how many people actually have the service, I think. So this past weekend I highly recommend people listening to the battle breakdown, the streamer battle that Josh and Antonio did. Antonio rightly brings up that like most people I think have Amazon Prime because it came with your Amazon Prime account. You have Amazon Prime Video because you have Amazon Prime. I still don't think that means like people are watching the service, I think. And obviously Rings of Power is the most watched show on a streaming service that week, more than Netflix. Again, big caveat because of the amount of minutes of content they released that week. And potentially people rewatching before the new season came out. So you get the double bump of like you get the new thing that had 3 episodes, and I rewatched season 1 that week before it came out, so I bumped up the viewing numbers.
Well,
So
unlucky for them, a bunch of people listened to our recap podcast of season one instead of watching it.
that's
So
true. That was
sorry,
smarter.
Amazon.
Yeah, we could have bumped the number up higher.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Jeffrey.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm still mad at Amazon for their ad policy, which again, if they had just raised the price for me, I would have been fine, but they automatically opted me into ads instead of raising my price. And now
Huh.
they've started introducing ads in the middle of episodes. So it's like something dramatic will happen in Rings of Power and then it'll cut to an ad, which is the worst thing to happen on a show like Rings of Power. It totally
Oh,
rips me from the vibe.
Int
Um,
oh, that's interesting. It's funny because I do think that there's ways in which, like, there's funny because the shows that, like, were made for like, network television and then get added to a streamer, like, they were built. I was listening to, a discussion about cold opens, and cold opens are essentially designed, um, with the idea of, like,
a
throwing to
commercial.
a commercial break.
Yeah. Now it's
Um
just title card
and now you're
or
just it's
music.
going to the title card, which then can be skipped. And so they're like, there actually isn't really a necessity for cold opens as much because of streaming, but you will still watch comedies that have a cold open. Part of that has been it's the way people write television. It's people who've watched
I
television,
love a good cold open.
and
It's
also
just as good as cold pizza.
and the other reason is that a lot of times you can do things. If you think about a show like The Office, it often would give them an opportunity to write in a scene that maybe doesn't work elsewhere that you
Yep.
can then do in a cold open. But I'm just thinking about, like, it's funny that we're gonna get shows you get shows that end up on streamers that have these like ad breaks built in, but then you have these shows like Rings of Power that was not designed or made to facilitate an ad break, and then the show has to decide like when an ad break goes in. This is like when we forget to stop down for a moment to let Jess Sterling insert an ad break, and we have to find just a moment in it. Sometimes I find I'm like, oh, that didn't really work, but I'll just put it in here anyway. Yeah, I can imagine it being really jarring, and I wonder if with the return of not the return, streamers starting to implement ad tiers, having ad tiers on their platforms, whether you will see sort of a direction on the shows that are created by the streamers to say you got to have a natural ad break in your show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. For me, it's just don't make me choose to pay you more. Just take it from me. That's all I want. All right, tons of new shows Tons of
there's a
new
lot.
shows going on, either coming or have already came here. So nobody nobody wants this dropped on Netflix this week. It's the Adam Brody Kristen Bell show. That's like, it's basically just like a raw. It reminded me a lot, like seeing the preview for this, of like like the Ashton Kutcher
Uh,
uh
like the
one.
ranch or the no,
Like
no,
the
no,
like
no.
Friends with benefits,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay,
Dane
yeah,
Cook is probably in one, like
yeah, got
these
it.
classic, like
No
take
strings
a
attached. Yeah,
no strings attached, take like a
your place, your
heartthrobby
mind. Yeah.
guy,
Uh-huh.
a heartthrobby woman, who are both really good, like both really big stars, put them in a will they won't they movie, and that was like a genre for a little while, it felt like. Now this is a full on show, and I feel like I haven't really seen this as a show as much before, but nobody wants this. At least that's the premise that I understand it to be. It could be very different than that. I haven't actually watched it yet, but surprisingly for me, it also has fantastic ratings. People are really loving this show. On IMDb, it's got an 8.2, which is a very good rating for IMDb. It's got, I
Mm.
think, like a 92% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. So like, it's being very well received. I'm definitely gonna check it out at some point. It seems like I think this is the one. It's based on a perhaps true story or something along
I
those
believe
lines.
it seems like Aaron Foster, who is the writer, has mostly been an actress on a bunch of stuff, and that this is loosely based on her own real life experiences, I believe
It's
is
about
what's
podcasting.
happening. Is
As
it?
a it's one of the it's one of them's a sex podcaster.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Is it is it is it Adrian Adam Brody, or I almost said Adrian Brody, but it's not.
I'm
Kristen
gonna
Bell is the
guess
podcaster.
I'm gonna guess Kristen Bell is the podcaster.
Well, her husband, right? Isn't she? She's with Dax Shepard. He's a famous pilot. Yeah, this is great. She's pulling from experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
So
number one
interesting.
currently on Netflix. Netflix dropped a bunch of stuff this week. Most of which is actually like not in the scripted realm, but in the unscripted realm.
Mm.
Between the Mr. McMahon documentary, Taran, that dropped on Netflix, I've watched all of it. I believe Mari and Matt have joined Chappelle to talk about the premiere. They're going to talk about the rest of it. The Ellen DeGeneres stand-up special dropped
Mm.
as well. And then the thing that I was most excited to see and have been hearing tons and tons of admiration for, and I cannot recommend this enough. And I've actually been chatting with Josh about if we can get additional coverage for this thing, so we will see what happens. Will and Harper dropped on Netflix. If you have not watched this, I highly recommend you do. It made me cry, and I cried a lot during this thing. It is about Will Ferrell and his friend Harper Steele, who used to be the head writer of Saturday Night Live. And Harper Steele used to be someone who would go on a lot of road trips with the United States. Sent a letter about coming out as a trans woman to a bunch of her friends. And Will Ferrell wanted to ask more questions, and they decided to go on a road trip from New York to California together. And they get into various hijinks, and it's emotional, and it's lovely. It's amazing. It's so good. I do feel like there's a lot in here about just like breaking through the conversation about how people talk about trans people in this thing. And I love that it's Will Ferrell doing this thing. Like it's just really good. I highly recommend people watch it. I think it's just lovely. I can't recommend it enough. Will and Harper dropped on Netflix. Yeah.
There is another show. Again, I apologize for not being able to check it out this week myself. We are very, very close to finishing up Big Brother, and then this should be a bit easier for me. But I was excited to see one of my all-time favorite comedians, David Mitchell, over in the UK. Is starring in a new show on the BBC called Ludwig. It's like I believe, my understanding, comedy, but a comedy drama, I guess, is
Being
what it's
billed as a
classified.
dramedy, Taran. Yeah.
Well, so okay, so it's probably more drama, but with you know what? It's an hour long. Look at that. I guess that means it's a
But
drama.
6 episodes. 6 episodes.
6 episodes, classic BBC 6 episode season. It's like he's gonna play a bit of a like detective-y kind of character. Anything that he does, I think, is worth giving a shot. So I'm excited to check this one out. Just queuing it up, and once I do, I will let you know if it's worth checking out yourself. But the reason I bring it up here instead of just like letting it pass and checking it out myself is that it also has been received very well so far from audiences who seem to have really enjoyed it. Also an 8.2 on IMDb. And looking at Rotten Tomatoes, it's got that's not the right one. But
Different
also
Ludwig.
doing very well on Rotten Tomatoes. Never mind, it doesn't have any ratings yet on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay, well, I'm very excited for this. It has a bunch of people, including David Mitchell, who I absolutely adore and love. So I'll be checking this out. There's like a couple things here in like the premise for me that I'm like, yep, that sounds like a show for me. And then I'm seeing a review that says, if you love Thursday Murder Club, you'll love this, which I recommended last week on the basis of Richard Osman's new book, We Solve Murders, being out. So I will be checking this out for sure. Definitely one that you put on my radar just before we started, and I'm gonna catch it.
Of course, from season 3 started, I have reports from Josh Wigler, who did manage to check out the first couple episodes, and he says it is exactly what you would expect from season 3. So, I
That's
mean,
good.
more
That's thumbs
news.
up, right?
No news is good news for
yeah.
From.
Yeah.
So that's fun. One thing I did think was interesting, Agatha all along. I said personally, I was a little skeptical of it. I really enjoyed the first half of WandaVision. The second half I felt was a bit, and so far from what I've seen, audiences not super sold on Agatha all along. A bit more fine than the heights of WandaVision. We also talked to Josh about that, who liked it, but similarly not quite WandaVision levels. I think his words were, "How could you be WandaVision levels, though?" But Grace, what were your thoughts?
I haven't watched this either. It's just been sitting there waiting for me. But I've heard the opposite. I have definitely heard the like, oh, it's not amazing, but that like it's a very fun crew of people who are on the show that makes it incredibly watchable. It did just get announced that 9.3 million people watched it in the first 7 days of release, and I believe it's also and there was a little bit of like back and forth on what this means and some back and forth on Twitter that I saw. It's the cheapest Marvel show they've ever made. And so the reason I bring that up even is that there's a little bit of like people being like, you fools, like, yeah, of course, like you're like, yeah, this was going to be a success, and look, and there was a little bit of the backlash to that of like, well, then why are you giving money to the other shows instead of this one that would have deserved more money and more budget? But whatever, it doesn't really matter. I say this all to say that like we just saw The Acolyte, which I think, mixed response and a heavily like anti-Acolyte response from a certain group of people. The reason I think that show mostly got canceled was that it was too expensive. And so all I think that this says about like the cost of the show is not that it is this particular show getting a reduced budget. My expectation would be that like no Marvel show will get a huge budget. That's my like sort of like the Marvel stuff has just not been successful enough for them. The TV shows have not been
Honestly,
successful
good
enough.
riddance.
I agree. This is what I'm saying of like, and if they could actually make more, I guess not more things, but this to me, what I like about it is that it's different. And so in that sense, if they spend less on things but try more different things, go for it. Do it.
Yes. To your credit as well, in checking Rotten Tomatoes, it does appear to have a good audience score there, 81%, as opposed to IMDb, which is down at like a 6.7. I think IMDb is usually a bit more prone to bad actors. But
there are some bad actors on this one, I will say.
Okay, so that's the thing. See, this is what I feel like I've talked about this on this podcast before. You cannot trust these things anymore because the review bombing is so prevalent. I don't know if there's been review bombing for this show, but I will, of course, end up checking out this show myself as well to get a sense of it. I'm sure we both will at some point, but
It's women
worth
centered.
tracking.
It's women centered. The main male character is LGBTQ, inclusive of POC characters. There are some people who are finding problems with the show.
I see. Let's yeah, if we just dig into this
It's a
IMDb
bit music. It's
rating.
musically. I think. I believe there's like a musical number in one of the first few episodes. So, yeah.
Wasn't
Yeah.
there a way to filter by gender? Pretty sure there was back in the day.
Yeah.
Used to be pretty telling.
Are those your things that are out that you've been watching? I have a few on
Things
my
that are
end.
out, I believe that's what I've got.
I'm mostly trekking along with the things that we have mostly been covering here. Obviously, Industry, The Penguin, and The Rings of
Oh,
Power.
Penguin. I watched the first episode of
Oh,
The Penguin.
tell me, because Josh Wigler calls it fine.
Fine. I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
I'm not I wouldn't say that I'm like in love with it.
I think that that's
Uh
fair.
but I think I felt mostly similar with the Batman, where
Okay.
like I really liked it. It was nothing that I like felt super connected to, but it was so pretty, and I loved the vibe, and I loved
Yeah.
the performances, and I loved the visuals, and the story was good.
The music
You know,
is great.
yeah, like everything about it just really good. Just I wasn't like super emotionally connected to the story in any really meaningful way. Similar thing here. But I like the premise. I like where it's going. And I feel like I'm really going to enjoy the show, and I love the visuals. I'm super excited about it. I'm like definitely, when Rings of Power ends, I feel like The Penguin is my next big show that I'm like paying attention to and really like looking forward to every week. So
Okay.
I'm definitely hopeful.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's fair. There's a theme that I was not expecting from the Penguin, which is basically um people who there's a reason why people underestimate them and
Yeah.
how they fight back in the ways that are the worst ways to respond to that, which is like, when you're involved in the underworld crime, world, it's bad. Maybe don't react like that. But it's like Oz is a man who lives with a disability. He sort of takes a protege under his wing as a homeless man with a stutter. And Sophia, who is seemingly going to be the main like antagonist of the season, is a woman who is underestimated. I think because she's the daughter of the mob boss, and all of those are like themes that for me, I don't know what I was expecting to come into this show and what we're getting from like doing the villain, examining the villain in the story. Those have been resonating for me in ways that I think are very good. And if we're continuing on that trajectory, I'm excited about more of the Penguin.
Yeah, especially like so it has a trope that I really love, which is like underdog uses Machiavellian tactics to attain power.
Right.
And that can be really, really, really fun. I really like those. I'm a huge like little finger guy, from the books. Like I love those kinds of things. So, if it leans into that and it does it well, I'm going to be super happy for this show. But we'll see.
I had a slight epiphany recently. I was chatting with Dr. Amanda, who had caught up for Industry, and I think has still been on the like. I think Amanda's still feeling like she's always having to defend that she doesn't feel like the show is quite as good as people were selling her on it. And I had a little bit of epiphany that I think Industry is very good. Just wrapped up its season finale, which I thought was incredible. There's a particular moment in that episode that I think is like one of the best things I've watched on TV this year. We chatted about it. Um, I do think there's a world where when I was looking at what had recently won at the Emmys, which is Shogun, Baby Reindeer, and Hacks, I think there
Mhm.
are ways that all of those shows, like even the most successful shows of all time, are iterative of something. but the main thing they're bringing is something new that we don't see on television, and are exploring something new. I think Baby Reindeer did that with the story
Yeah.
it eventually tells about the thing that Richard Gadd is going through. I think is something that we don't see on television.
Mm,
Shogun is a Japanese feudal, it
yeah.
has vibes of Game of Thrones, but we've never seen, at least in American, like Western culture,
It's
like
funny because it is a very old trope, but they
I,
managed to like really refresh it. You're right. It was very
I
new.
and then Hacks, which is the dynamic between this older woman comedian and then the younger sort of millennial comedian that I think again is like new. Like yes, all of these are inspired, and there are versions of this that they're taking from other things and putting into their show. But I think some of the most central things about them feel really new. I think it's fair to look at industry and be like, when I'm talking about the things that they did the best this season, I'm like, oh, that's a thing they're taking from Succession. The Penguin is iterating. And so I
Yeah.
think that sometimes when I'm like deciding between a show that's like very good, and then it's like, oh, this is the best thing I'm watching. Industry for me is hitting it, but I understand why some people are not feeling like it. I think there's a lot on television right now that is very good versions of things we've
Yeah.
seen before. And so that means they're very good, but they don't have this sense of like newness to they're like this innovative thing that they're doing. I feel like for me, the thing I'd put most in the bucket of what feels new is English Teacher, which we've talked about a couple times.
Can I just say that was a really good point. I really connected with what you said.
Right.
I feel like it's exactly how I feel about both Industry and the Penguin. Is that like it doesn't feel like the Penguin is necessarily doing anything new.
Yeah.
Industry certainly wasn't. Industry felt like a show that I could have watched 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's fine. It's good. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're totally right. Like the things that are really popping right now are things that are like really finding new pathways, whether they're using old tropes and refreshing them or just entirely unique like Baby Reindeer, or even like for us at least something like Ripley, which is taking a very old story, similar kind of tropey thing where it's like underdog Machiavellian tactics,
Sure.
but taking a really fresh approach to it. Yeah, I think great point. I'm
I,
gonna really be thinking about that.
I think you have to, because I was thinking about there's this there was I think it was on the Russ's Entertainment, which is a podcast with Richard Osman, where he was talking about he had a friend who had written a play, and the play was doing okay. Like it basically wasn't making much money. And it was an original idea. It was critically, it was like super well received, but it never really like took off. And then I think he got approached. I can't remember what 90s thing they were like, do you want to write the this thing, we've seen this of like in Broad. It was like, do you want to write the Mean Girls musical? And someone goes, writes the Mean Girls musical, to the point where they then make the Mean Girls musical into a movie again, right? But there is a way, and like at Broadway and on the West End in England, that like people, especially go, and they're looking at like, what am we gonna go watch? And there is a reason why it's like, well, I know something about that thing, so I'm going to go to that thing. And I think between like probably Shogun and there's these things that I think have been successful in last years, you have to have something to draw people. Like you need the sentence pitch to say like, this is what the thing is. And then when you're in it, it can be innovative, it can feel new, it can feel fresh. I understand why there's this IP driven like trend right now, right? Of like everything feels like it's IP of something. What is this thing that we're then doing? And shows that can figure out how to like have enough of like show like we're doing this book, like we're gonna take this book and we're gonna adapt it. And it's gonna feel, the pitch I heard early on about it was like it's like Game of Thrones. And then when you get in, you're like, well, it's not really Game of Thrones, but I get why that was enough to get me to watch the show, and then I fell in love with it. And so I think like where we'll see that in the next little while is interesting to me. And it's where I'll be like keeping my eye on like things I'm watching, like English Teacher. Yeah, of course we've seen a bunch of shows, specifically comedies set in schools, and we've seen like this thing, but this is a queer man, so like a liberal progressive man who is then navigating, like in the last episode I watched, like his students are like ahead of him in terms of like the things that they believe, like Gen Z culture, right? And am I right about that? Gen Z? Yeah, I think I'm right about that. I think they would be
Gen Alpha, maybe.
maybe they're
I think
Gen Alpha.
no, not quite, probably.
And just the way that he feels old, but he's a millennial, and he's like, I'm not keeping, and that to me has been a really fun space to explore. In the second episode of that season, the series is about this thing that I guess is very popular and common in the South, where it's a day where like the girls dress up as football players and the football players dress up as cheerleaders. And there's a way in which he's navigating this whole thing of being like, it is homophobic and transphobic, but then there is a way, then when the Gay Straight Alliance tries to like shut it down, he's actually seeing a reason why it could actually be a learning opportunity. Like, right. So he's navigating like gender and society and cultural clash and stuff in a way that I think is like extremely fresh. And so that's why I am enjoying English Teacher.
Gen Alpha were born 2010 and up. So I don't know.
Yeah, this would be right on the cusp of like, if these are high school students, they're basically, the cusp of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Yeah.
There you go.
So yep.
I will say, I've heard you talk about English Teacher a decent amount. Every time you mention it, the image that comes to my mind is AP Bio.
It's not AP Bio, but
is it anything like AP Bio?
I
think the images in the marketing make me feel like it must be like AP Bio, which is honestly why I didn't check it out.
I think that Brian Jordan Alvarez, who is the lead creator of the show, I've been following him on Twitter, TikTok for a long time. His TikTok is quite absurd. If you ever watch it, he does a lot of character work. He uses a lot of filters to like make his characters. I'm sure if you could find an article, I think there is one actually that came out about like his success on TikTok. I'm so happy to see him. And then basically I feel like all the other people who are like sort of in the TikTok orbit of him are like making guest spots on the show. Trixie Mattel shows up in episode 2 from Drag Race. It's a very fun crew. I would say that there's a big difference between Brian Jordan Alvarez and Glenn Howerton in the lead of a show. Brian Jordan Alvarez, I think, is playing a more likable character. Maybe not one who's always making like, he's not like morally, he's not like goody good to, he's not like
the way you described it made me think it's not AP Bio, but I decided to bring it up anyway in case other people were thinking it too. Because the way you described it made it feel more like, yes, we are behind him in like, as he's not like a perfect character, but like he is well-meaning, as opposed to AP Bio, who he was very much not well-meaning.
I agree. Yes. Yes. I think that Glenn Howerton as Jack in AP Bio is not. He is much more of a like Jeff from Community than Brian Jordan Alvarez is not that, I would say.
Yeah.
He's not. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So
anything else that's currently on?
Currently, I'm just watching all the stuff. Slow Horses, Only Murders in the Building. Those are the other things I'm checking out. I did watch a couple of movies, Taran, if you'll indulge me for a minute. Megalopolis. I saw it. I saw Megalopolis.
How long is it?
2 hours, 20 minutes.
Oh, that's not bad. I was expecting it to be like 4 hours.
I know. I did think that I was very surprised when I saw that it came in at 2 hours and 20 minutes.
A movie called Megalopolis sounds like it would be 4 hours long.
Yeah, it's it is Francis Ford Coppola of Godfather, of Apocalypse Now. It is his magnum opus. He sold his winery. He did all the yes.
Can you imagine being a guy that's like, yeah, the guy from that thing in the 70s? But he's still very mega famous and has made plenty of very good movies. But like I think that honestly speaks to how good The Godfather is.
It is. So the story of him is that like his movies would go over budget. It was chaotic. Like there's a whole documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now that's about like how miserable it was, how like tough it was, how people wanted to quit and they wanted to leave and people were losing their mind, etc. And then what he'd create is like genius. He created Apocalypse Now, created The Godfather. Like he would show up. Like when you saw the thing, you're like, I guess the chaotic nature of the genius is worth indulging because he makes these great movies. And he's had this idea for Megalopolis for many, many years. Finally tried to make it happen. He spent $120 million of his own money to make this happen because nobody would finance the movie. It made about $4 million this weekend, Taran. And I think that's about right. Here's the thing. I think it's a pretty bad movie. People saying it's the worst movie you've ever seen. Like it's the worst well-made movie I've ever seen. Like I've seen worse movies in terms of like people didn't know how to make. He knows how to make a movie. He does it. He shows it. The themes of this movie are about Francis Ford Coppola. It's him being like, you got to let a genius make things, no matter, even when people don't believe them. And
Okay,
so,
can
as a
I tell you,
character study, it's interesting.
Megalopolis.
Yeah.
When I heard about this movie, I initially thought it was a remake of Metropolis
No, it's
for
not.
Fritz Lang. Is it anything to do, any similarity whatsoever to
Uh,
Metropolis?
no, the Megalopolis is basically Francis Ford Coppola trying to write a a Greek a Greek like a Greek tragedy. So like the characters are named like Caesar and Cicero and Aubrey Plaza. I almost don't want to spoil what her name is, but it's amazing. But we have like, and it's set in like an alternate future, or at least a near
A
distant
Roman
future.
epic set in an imagined modern America.
Yeah. And again, I don't think the movie is good. There are moments that people are laughing at the theater, at moments that Francis Ford Coppola did not want people to laugh at. But it is an example. This is the best version of this thing people have been doing recently, which is like, oh, this movie tells us a lot about the director. This movie is about this direct. This is like Oppenheimer, right? Of like, these are the things that Christopher Nolan is interested in making a movie, and we're seeing like him making the bomb is him making the movie. Of like, what's the one Ferrari that just came out? People were like,
Mm.
that's Michael Mann like making a movie is the same as like, Ferrari, like this like insertion of the director into the themes of the movie. This is the best example of it by far. So it's fascinating. It's just not good.
Man, Google really strikes it into the heart here in the about section on the right, where I know you already said the budget, but seeing it right next to each other, budget 120 million USD, box office 4 million.
Do you know about the interactive experience of Megalopolis, Taran? Do you know about this?
I don't know anything about
There's
this
a
movie.
scene in the movie where somebody in the movie theater is supposed to hold a microphone, and while a voiceover is playing, they are supposed to ask the question to Adam Driver, who's
No, I
like
did hear
on the
about
screen
this.
at their level and is like talking to them, and it's a back and forth,
Yeah,
and then leave. So it's like an interactive version that like some movie theaters you don't have to do it because it's just a voiceover, but theaters are still doing it. The theater I went to, they did
it's
it,
like
and they had
Blue's
to.
Clues or
It's
Dora
like
the Explorer.
it's like Blue's Clues with Doors the Explorer. Yeah. And I don't know why he did this, but he did it.
Listen,
Anyway,
sometimes they really love to push the medium, you know? It's like when The Hobbit was in 48 frames.
I guess. I also saw The Wild Robot. I love The Wild Robot. Highly encourage people to check out The Wild Robot. I think it like loses itself a little bit at the end, but it's only an hour 40, which basically means it's an hour 30 because that's like credits. It's fun. It's cute. It's got some delightful themes, fun voice actors like Pedro Pascal is in this thing, Lupita Nyong'o. It's fun. Watch The Wild Robot. It won the weekend at
Famously
35.
advertised by Big Brother and Sari Fields on Survivor.
That's right. That's right. I think this is worth checking out. People should go check out The Wild Robot. That's what I watched. That's what I've watched, Taran.
All right. Well, there are a couple of things coming up as well to look forward to. Heartstopper on
Oh, yes.
Netflix. Very, very cute, I would say, show. Very, very cutesy. I would say like Heartstopper is the kind of show that I watch and I'm often waiting for it to like try to gut punch me,
And it never
you know,
does.
and then
Never
it
does.
doesn't. And
Yeah.
that's that's such a relief.
It has non-tragic sadness, I think. It has like moments of being like, there's a character. I think Nick meets his father, and like that scene doesn't go well, but like then they hug you after.
Yeah, they
They
go
never leave
through
you.
challenges,
Yeah.
but not in a way where they're trying to like rip your heart out. You know what I
I,
mean? I will say I preferred the first season to the second in general.
I agree.
But I'm definitely looking forward to see what they do with the third.
Shows sometimes struggle when it's like the characters get together too. I think that's
Yeah.
a real thing in that
Like
show.
then it feels like they're starting to maybe create conflict in order to keep the show going, and that can get a little tricky. But we'll see. I think I'm interested to see what they do. Um, The Legend of Vox Machina. Have you checked this out at
I've
all?
I've watched all of it. Yeah.
Okay, because this is one where I feel like I didn't give it too much of a chance, I will say. I
Uh-huh.
gave it a couple of episodes, but it was not working for me, which is a shame because I love the genre. So this is a TV show, and you correct me if I'm wrong here. You're more familiar with it than I am. Based largely off of a very popular D&D podcast
Yeah,
stream
Twitch
show
Twitch show, I guess I would
Twitch
say, is
stream.
probably the best way to describe it. It's Critical Role. It is the
Critical Role.
most
Yes.
popular Twitch channel, I believe, ever. I think
Yes,
it's the most.
I think they were at the top of the leaked Twitch income charts back in the day.
They were. Very
I was on
interesting
that list.
time, I think, for Critical Role, in the sense that I fell in love with Critical Role with its second campaign. This show, which that is also getting an animated show. Legend of Vox Machina is based on the first campaign they did, which basically they are all voice actors. They're all in the business of being voice actors. Matt Mercer is probably the most successful dungeon master of all time, just in terms of like the success of Critical Role. They basically had started to play campaign 1 and then decided to like, let's stream it and bring it live. So they kind of took their home game and broadcast it live. It blew up immensely. Campaign 2 was incredibly successful, doing live shows, etc. They've really expanded what they're doing. I believe they've recently announced that for campaign 4, they are not playing Dungeons and Dragons and are instead playing a new system that they basically created because of some of the controversy that happened when Wizards of the Coast announced its new rule system. And I think we're going to see a bit of that of the fracturing. I would love to at one day, Taran, on the podcast, we spend some time talking about what has happened with Wizards of the Coast and D&D.
Basically, they're shady and lame and corporate.
They try to make a lot of money, and that's a bad, in ways.
So the idea that like the most popular D&D group would like offshoot and help create some competition for that, like that's kind of chill. I like that.
Yeah. D&D, it's blown up in the last swing. Jess and I have tickets to go watch Dimension 20 at Madison Square Garden next year. So I'm in it. I love Dungeons & Dragons. I love Let's Plays. Legend of Vox Machina, my sense is that when I'm like in conversation about it, I like it. I don't like it as much as people who have watched the campaign. So I've never watched campaign 1. And then people get into the thing of like the interesting combos, like, oh, they didn't do this thing, and of course that wouldn't really work because they're adapting it to a television animated show, but it works in a D&D setting, etc., etc. So an interesting concept, and I'm happy that they are successful. This is probably, I think, in my like, it's very good, not amazing bucket for me.
My
personally.
experience of watching it was like I watched a 2 or 3 episodes, and I have no idea what happened in any of them. It just was like so much, and it felt like I was missing a lot of context personally. And I don't know if like the people that like the show are largely already fans, or if there are a lot of people who aren't familiar with it that tried to watch it, or if it was just me. But it's definitely worth a shot if you like D&D, you like the genre. Certainly, I'm sure if you're already fans of them, you know about it. But season 3 dropping this week, or at least starting this week, and so it's people love this show, so worth talking about.
The piece I would say is that I agree. I felt a little lost when it started. I felt like by the end of the season I was fine, but there's a way in which they kind of just drop us into. They decided to start in a moment of the campaign that they thought would make the most interesting television show, instead of trying to animate the whole thing. So I do feel like we got dropped in
like that. I want to start at the beginning.
But what's interesting is that for campaign 1, they did that already. They were playing a campaign that then they like, and then they started to air it live. And so I'm Jess is saying in the chat that she's more excited for campaign 2 show. I am as well. This is
that like so it's okay, hold on. Is this does that mean it's like a new storyline, new characters, new show? So the way that they've done all 3 of their settings so far, it's in the same world that Matt Mercer has built, but and Jess can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe each one is like different. They're not set at the same time so that they can play different characters, and it might not be like completely different times. Like there's a chance that like some of the stuff some of the stuff that happened before could then impact this thing, but it's basically they reset with new like characters and started from scratch, and that group got together. For instance, my question for both Grace and Jess in the chat, who is answering,
Jess wants to pop on. Jess can as well.
Could I start watching season 3 having not watched seasons 1 or 2?
Well, I think you would find yourself in the same problem because you're in the Legend of Vox Machina, but the other show is going to be the Mighty
Oh, it's a
Nine.
different show that's coming.
Yeah, different
I
show.
see.
Legend of Vox Machina. This is the Thursday's Legend of Vox Machina. The Mighty Nine show is also coming.
Okay, I'll check that one. I'll
And
give
I
that
think
one a shot.
I would recommend you try. It's where I fell in love with Critical Role. I'm very excited, but because I fell in love with it, I might love it in the same way that I think people who love season one are liking. But I do also think when they rebuilt their characters, now they're building characters in which they know that they're. I think that there's a way in like campaign 2 has the best sense for me of like, now we know what we're doing in terms of making a successful Twitch show, and we're gonna make our characters like that. We're gonna build our backstories like that. This is how we're gonna play this campaign in a way that I think could be more conducive to having not people who watched Critical Role, the tabletop show, find the TV show and very much like it.
I have one quick thing to
Jess
add.
is here.
Campaign 1 is much more like, these are your heroes and you follow them being legendary heroes. Campaign 2, which is the Mighty Nine, which is the one that's going to get a brand new show, is more like, they're kind of a-holes, but they're also really impressive and heroic. So it's more of a fun vibe, I think. If you're looking at campaign 1, like Grace said, they're learning how to play D&D, so you're getting much more, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but like you have like this big barbarian who rages. You know what I mean? It's much more stereotypical characters, I think. And I think campaign 2 is much more like fun, creative, like the vibes are good in campaign 2. And campaign 3 is a whole other animal.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jess. So yeah, I mean, I think my plan then would be to watch the new show.
Yeah.
If I like it, maybe I'll go back with a little more confidence to Vox Machina.
Okay.
So I'll keep people informed along the way. One more thing coming from my end, at least, the franchise starting this week. This is Armando Iannucci and Sam Mendes are the creators, which is quite the duo there. It has a great cast. It looks like Billy Magnuson, Ayakash. So yeah, this is I'm looking for Armando Iannucci, by the way, behind the now oft memed Veep, and of course before that, The Thick of It. People didn't love Avenue 5, but I thought it was fun. But I think this has potential, but could certainly go the way of Avenue 5, which was basically the vibe of this guy is very like dry, goofy humor, if that makes sense. It's very goofy, but very dry at the same time. It makes you feel smart if you get it and you like it. It makes you feel like this is a bad show if it's not for you, because it might be for you. So,
yeah,
I think it works really well in a political setting, which is why Veep and The Thick of It work really well. The sci-fi setting of Avenue 5 wasn't quite as well suited for his style, I think. So what we can expect from the franchise, I'm not sure. It's I'm curious to find out.
He also wrote The Death of Stalin, which I quite love.
Yes.
That movie as well. I think the franchise could be good. I was a little skeptical. I worried that this was going to be more like, there was a Netflix movie that was on the set of basically like a big superhero movie. I didn't love, but now knowing who's behind this one, including someone who I love quite a bit, is Marina Hyde, who's co-host with Richard Osman, on Rest Entertainment, is an executive producer on the show. She's a writer and journalist. They are putting this also on Sunday nights after the Penguin, which to me feels good. They could have done the Monday night thing and they chose not to. They're giving it the Penguin lead in.
What's funny about that is that the show is about superhero movie making.
That is so funny that it's going to be right after the superhero television show. I'm actually surprised that they put it right after.
I think that's a pretty good spot for it.
It's very good. Hamish Patel is in this. Laliana Pape, if you are a Taskmaster fan, is in here. Billy Magnuson. Richard E. Grant is on it as well. I'm excited for this one. I was not, in addition to like seeing who's behind it, I have heard good things about this from people who have been able to catch a peek of it. So I'm pretty excited for the franchise as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm looking forward to. Anything we're missing, Grace?
I think that's it. I think we kind of in terms of what's coming, not many other movies coming. There's some other movies I really want to go check out, but they're kind of all out and I just have to figure out how to get to them. So a lot of stuff on television right now, Taran. So
yeah.
No.
Packed episode, fun one.
Good one. No.
All right. Well, that's what we have for you then this week. Of course, we'll be back next week to continue to talk you through the latest of what's going on. I'm probably going to prioritize. I have been slowly watching Chaos.
That was in the charts.
Favorite.
That was in the Nielsen charts for that week that it debuted. It was in the top 10. I think for original shows. I don't know that it was in the overall, but it was definitely in the top 10 for original shows.
Still enjoying it. And someday I'll get back to the bear and industry.
The bear, yeah. Okay, funny.
But yes, I'm probably going to prioritize some horror stuff so that we can give you an update next week on that. But lots of things to check out. I have a huge list once Big Brother ends, and I have the chance to really start diving into some of this stuff. So stay tuned for that. Of course, if you didn't subscribe earlier to the podcast feed, to the YouTube channel, if you're completely unsubscribed, I'm sorry. That's all I'm going to say.
I gave you my horror philosophy for free. You lied to me.
Everything you just heard, fake news. You got the bad version of the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. We can tell. We know.
If you but you have one hope.
Redemption.
If you go and you subscribe right now,
yeah,
it will wipe your memory of all the bad stuff and rewrite it with the good stuff that you should have heard.
It works just like the Men in Black thing. It works just like it.
Yeah. And in addition to that, as just the whipped cream on top, just a little extra for you, you'll be notified when these podcasts drop. Yeah, we just threw that in for you, just like that.
That's right.
Yeah. So stay tuned for next week. Of course, in the meantime, Rings of Power finale coming. We'll be having some coverage of that. Industry Penguin. Grace has got you covered on all of it.
Yep, we did our industry finale coverage. The episode was tremendous. It's well worth checking out. There's a wild thing that happens in that episode, just so you know. And then we covered the Penguin as well. And yeah, that's what I got going on.
All right. So there it is. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. And we will see all of you next time.